Hey Navigators, today I am in the land of DeLand, DeLand, Florida, home of this amazing theater and an awesome town. So let's hit the road. Today we're in Volusia County, in the city of DeLand, a unique small town in Central Florida built on baking soda, a fever, and a well-known hat. Good morning, Navigators. It is 4:42 in the morning. 4:42 in the morning. Talking quietly because it's, well, 4:42 in the morning. Anyway, I gotta get the Navi out. It rained last night. I couldn't get it on the truck beforehand, and I did check that all the plastic and everything is good from the previous video. I know I was worried about that. Yeah, I have to change my gas cap. Oh my gosh, this is hard as a rock. That is hard as a rock. So that makes me think that I may need to check all of the rubber on this bike. So a couple of days before the ride, I checked on the Navi to see if any of the rubber parts of the bike had hardened, like the seal for the gas cap, and fortunately none of those did. Things are pliable here. Everything looked good, which is important because you don't want something to break when you're on the road. That normally doesn't end well. But now I gotta get the Navi out here, see if it starts and works like a charm like it's supposed to. So let's get started. So the first thing I wanted to do was to inflate my tires, but this portable tire inflator is lithium ion. I guess I didn't charge it frequently enough because it wouldn't hold the charge. It lost that ability, which is not ideal. So I had to have it charge all night just to get enough power out of it to fill the tires in the morning. So got to replace that. Filled up the gas, checked the oil, got the Navi started. All was good. One of the things that I had to do is I had to put the license plate on the back of my truck down on my carrier. I had to do that before 5 in the morning. That's one of the things that happens when you haven't ridden in a while, is that you kind of forget all the little steps that are required, and so any additional steps just catch you off guard by surprise. All right, so I have put this Navi on this carrier successfully so many times, but the 2 times I've actually recorded me doing it, they've been the worst. It's the middle of the night. If you don't line it up correctly, the tires are up against the edge and it just makes it harder, especially for a light bike like a Navi. Yeah, so you can hear the tires like squeaking as they're rubbing, and it's just taking way too much effort for me to get this thing up there. It's just sad, really. Now, I don't know if I'm strapping down this Navi correctly. It's probably overkill for such a light bike, but no one's ever showed me how to do it, and I've figured out how to do it well enough, quick enough, so. But don't laugh at me. Or, that's okay. You can laugh at me, just don't let me know. All right, Navigators, I made it. It's 8:30 in the morning. 8:30. It's a long drive. Now I gotta have to unstrap the bike and get on the road. I gotta tell you, the interstate from Tampa Bay past Orlando is under construction, and it was like bouncing all over the place, and every time I'm looking in my rearview mirror going, I hope this bike, the straps are still on tight, because it doesn't weigh a lot. It can bounce quite a bit. And I've had it where, you get it all nice and tight, and then and then you hit a really big bump and it's shifted. Everything's not nearly as tight anymore, so I had to stop and tighten it up again about 3/4 of the way through the ride. Welcome to the ride, Navi-Gators. Today we're riding the Navi through a town built on one man's dream and his desire to give back and create a community of business, culture, and education. Part of the cool factor of DeLand is it has really amazing old homes, like all over the place. So every once in a while, I'm just gonna point to a home while I'm talking and riding and show you some of these cool places. I mean, they're everywhere around downtown and the college. It's really, really neat. Well, Navigators, I was so excited. This ride is possible because it didn't rain for the first weekend in months. I mean, it was blazingly hot, don't get me wrong. The heat index was like 105 or something, but it was worth it. It was so exciting that I could drive out there and get a ride in the early morning so I could share it with you. It made me so happy. Hopefully that'll continue and I'll be able to share more rides with you. So DeLand is north of Orlando. It's about halfway between Orlando and Daytona Beach. And if I would have realized that before I packed my Navi up and headed off, I probably would have extended this ride to include Daytona Beach, but I did not. So, but the trip to DeLand was worth it by itself. You know, in many ways, DeLand, Florida shouldn't be here, really. 150 years ago, this stretch of high pine ridge in the middle of Florida, it was just a wilderness, and it wasn't on anyone's map. It certainly didn't have a name that stuck. It had persimmon trees and black bears and panthers and, well, a handful of people stubborn enough to believe that something could be built here. And eventually, they did it. Before there was DeLand, there was Persimmon Hollow, a name as plain and unglamorous as the land itself. Wild persimmon trees grew thick around the natural springs. The only way to get here was by steamboat up the St. Johns River into the country that really didn't care whether you survived or not. The first man to try was Reuben Marsh. In 1841, Marsh rode through here as part of a scouting party during the Seminole Indian War. Legend has it that he made camp one night beside a lake, and he looked out at the landscape thick with deer, turkey, wolves, bears, a wilderness so alive that it seemed to be waiting for someone. He said to have told his men beside him that, if I come out of this war alive, I'm going to come back here to settle and raise cattle. He kept that promise. The war ended in 1846. Marsh got married, came back, staked a settler's claim, and built a cabin with his bare hands in the middle of the Florida hammock. The pioneers who followed him lived the same way, self-sufficient, self-reliant, growing their own food, sewing their own clothes, carving homes out of raw wilderness with nothing but will and a hand axe. After the Civil War, more of them came every year chasing the same quiet promise Reuben Marsh had chased, that there was a future here for anyone willing to build it. What none of them knew yet was that there was a man who would give this place its name, and he hadn't even set foot in Florida. If you have watched enough of my videos, you know that I often find myself riding through cemeteries. And it's not that I'm morbid. I've talked about this before. I've had some medical issues, challenges over the course of my life that makes me appreciate time and appreciate being alive, probably more than some. But the real reason that I ride through these cemeteries in these small towns is because every small town has their story, and oftentimes in their cemeteries are the people who actually lived those stories. And so there's a part of me that thinks the best way that I can honor them in the stories that I'm telling is to acknowledge their existence. And unfortunately, by the time I show up on my Navi, most of them, if not all of them, are in cemeteries. In March of 1876, a businessman named Henry Addison DeLand was overdue for a vacation. He traveled with his wife to South Carolina to visit family, and there, his brother-in-law, a man named O.P. Terry, was in the grip of something the old Florida settlers called orange fever. Terry had just bought land in Florida, and he was desperate for Henry to come see it. DeLand almost didn't go. But the two families took a train to Jacksonville, a steamboat up the river, and then a horse-drawn rig down a rough trail through dry sand and thick underbrush. Henry DeLand was, by every account, unimpressed, and he was more than a little annoyed. He begged Terry to turn the wagon around, but Terry wouldn't do it. "Better country beyond," he kept saying. And then, gradually, the land began to change beneath them. The flat scrub gave way to rolling hills. Towering pine trees rose up and formed a canopy overhead, shielding them from the Florida sun. As they neared what is now Orange City, they could hear saws cutting timber and hammers driving nails, the sound of something being built. DeLand looked around and said, "This looks like the West. I'm willing to go on." They rode on, past young orange groves in bloom, the air thick with the scent of white blossoms. And somewhere on that high rolling ridge, land where you could see for miles through the pines, Henry Addison DeLand stopped being a tourist and started seeing a town. Before the day was over, he bought 159 acres. He'd met a handful of the settlers already living there and decided on the spot that they were exactly the kind of people worth building something around. When DeLand got home, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. You see, he'd made a private promise to himself years earlier that if he ever achieved real financial success, everything beyond what he needed would go towards something greater than himself. And he had been successful, making his wealth manufacturing baking soda. And now he had his answer. He would build a town. Not a haphazard cluster of cabins thrown up in the wilderness, but a planned community built deliberately around education, culture, and faith in the people who would come to call it home. He believed so much in this that he sold his business in the north. He hired men to clear the land, lay out streets, and put up buildings. He recruited settlers, many of them like him, and brought them to the south, to a place that, well, it didn't really exist yet, except in his imagination. On December 6, 1876, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the settlers gathered in a small cabin and voted on a name for their community. They didn't choose Persimmon Hollow. They chose to honor the man who had staked his fortune and his future on a patch of Florida pine ridge most people would have ridden straight past. They named it DeLand. Hey Navi-Gators, are you getting hungry? I thought so, because it's time to feed Algo the algorithm. You know, YouTube keeps changing, AI has affected the landscape and there's a lot of things going on. I think a lot of that is actually for the better. It seems that I've gotten a lot more traction, or visibility, I should say, on my videos, because apparently the AI that's doing these algorithms not only can know what you say through the transcript it creates for closed caption, but it also now can look at your video and visually describe to itself what's on there. Like, oh, this is a motorcycle ride through a small town, and the writer's talking about the history of that small town. So the algorithms have improved a bit to actually point people that are not just interested in what I'm talking about, maybe the visuals that I'm presenting, to people who would either like to see visuals like that or hear stories like I'm telling. So that's kind of cool. But I think one of the most important things that we can do that's always been valid and important is to expand this community, to people who like this sort of content. So if you could, hit buttons, say things, any sort of interaction helps. Watching the video all the way through helps. Watching multiple videos in a row helps. All the different things that people always ask you for. You don't have to do it. I won't be offended. But if you could, hit buttons, say things, I don't know, whatever you want to do, it's fine. But the more you interact, the better. And I'd really, really appreciate it. It means a lot. Sincerely. Henry DeLand didn't just want a town. He wanted a cultured one. And he knew that meant education had to come first. In 1877, barely a year after the town was named, he built its first public school. 6 years later, in 1883, he went even further. He founded the DeLand Academy, the first private college in the state of Florida. It opened in a rented room at the First Baptist Church, and remarkably for the era, it admitted both men and women from the very beginning. For a while, it looked like Henry DeLand's vision was unstoppable. New buildings rose, orange groves flourished. The town he'd sketched out on paper was becoming real, brick by brick, tree by tree. Then, in 1885, disaster struck. A brutal freeze swept through Central Florida and wiped out the citrus crop that the entire local economy and DeLand's own fortune was built on. Like so many other Florida landmen of that era, Henry DeLand's investments were suddenly worth almost nothing, and he couldn't sustain the academy any longer. Many people at this point would walk away, right? Take their losses and go home and try to rebuild. And the town would quietly fade away back into the pine scrub that it came from. But Henry DeLand wasn't that kind of guy. He turned to one of his friends, a wealthy Philadelphia hat manufacturer named, you've probably heard this before, John B. Stetson. Yeah, the Stetson hat guy. He had a winter home in DeLand, and he had served as one of the founding trustees of the academy from the start. Stetson stepped in. He took over the endowment and kept the school alive. In 1889, in gratitude, the school was renamed in his honor, John B. Stetson University. Over the following decade, Stetson poured more than $1 million into the campus. DeLand Hall, still the oldest building in Florida in continuous use for higher education, and Elizabeth Hall, a colonial revival masterpiece modeled after Independence Hall in Philadelphia. It was built in tribute to his own hometown and named after his wife. By 1900, Stetson had opened Florida's very first law school. The Hatters, That's their nickname, and it's what their sports teams are called today. The Hatters had become a permanent institution. Henry DeLand gave the town its name and its founding vision, but John B. Stetson made sure that vision survived the freeze that should have killed it. Between the two of them, a wilderness outpost became something else entirely. A place built on purpose around the idea that a small Florida town could be something bigger, could be a center focused on the development of the mind. Henry DeLand had a phrase of what he had hoped this place would become. He wanted DeLand to be the Athens of Florida, a city where art, learning, and culture didn't just survive, but flourished. That ambition took physical form in 1921 when the Athens Theater rose on Florida Avenue. It was designed by Orlando architect Murray King in a lavish Italian Renaissance style, built by local DeLand craftsmen. The Athens opened its door on January 6, 1922, with a movie, vaudeville acts, and live theater under one roof. The town, meanwhile, was proving it could survive its own mistakes. A fire in the 1880s had torn through downtown's modern storefronts. Legend says it started in a saloon, and the city responded by banning wood construction downtown entirely, and banning saloons along with it. That's why so much of historic DeLand is built from the same sand and lime brick today. And you know what's interesting, as a side note, is that if you look at any city, all the cities that were built in the 1800s, almost all of them had a fire that wiped them all out and they had to be rebuilt. It's almost all of them. You can look it up. It's crazy. And DeLand was no different. In 1887, DeLand became the Volusia County seat. And you know what? That's a critical component for small towns, especially in Florida. They survive so long because they are the county seat, which means that the courthouse will have to be there, which means that it will always have some sort of business there that can support some sort of commerce around it. And around that commerce will be homes. And so no matter what happens, because that core business, the county seat, is the government, it never goes out of business. That means that engine that keeps that little town alive never stops churning. Now, DeLand was also the first city in Florida to have electricity. And through the roaring 20s land boom, which was huge in Florida, the town swelled with new subdivisions, new sidewalks, new energy. For decades, the Athens Theater sat at the center of it. During the Great Depression, when almost nothing else in town was affordable, kids could get into the Athens for 9 cents. That little theater carried the whole town through hard times. First dates, first kisses, midnight movies after the prom, generation after generation. But nothing stays golden forever. By the 1950s and 60s, the joke around town was that the sidewalks rolled up by 5 o'clock, which means no one was using them. And then it got worse. Shopping malls opened in nearby cities and pulled shoppers and businesses away from downtown DeLand. This impacted small towns everywhere in the nation. The Athens Theater, worn down after decades without real investment, eventually closed its doors. Storefronts in downtown emptied out one by one, and by 1985, more than 85% of downtown's commercial space sat vacant. People stopped calling it DeLand. They started calling it Deadland. That's not nice. But it felt like it was true. One longtime merchant, a woman named Susie Macon, she remembers those years really vividly. She said in an article, "There were times in different years that I could have shot off a cannon in the middle of the street and not hit anybody, especially in the summer." The town Henry DeLand had built on a promise of culture and permanence was slowly hollowing out in front of the people who loved it. But here's the thing about a county seat town with good bones. Even when it's empty, it's not gone. In 1985, DeLand became one of the first 5 communities in Florida chosen for the National Trust's Main Street program, a structured, deliberate effort to bring historic downtowns back to life. In response, the Main Street DeLand Association was formed. City leaders got behind it, and piece by piece, they started rebuilding what had been lost, restoring building facades, burying power lines, fixing sidewalks, creating brick walkways, and critically, going after the one building that symbolized everything the town had once been. In December of 1994, with the help of a state preservation grant, Main Street DeLand bought the Athens Theater, reportedly about 60 days before it was scheduled to be torn down. They restored the exterior first, unveiling the facade and marquee in 1997. And then came years of fundraising, galas, costume balls, a community that refused to let the theater go. Eventually, on January 6, 2009, exactly 87 years after it first opened, the fully restored Athens Theater reopened its doors. Sarah Finch of the West Volusia Historical Society said, "Restoring the theater, it did give a cultural center and heartbeat back to downtown." And from there it snowballed. Independent restaurants, boutiques, a wine bar, an art museum, consolidating downtown. Also, with the help of the students that continue to attend Stetson University, continue to also support those smaller businesses that are very uniquely college-related, like different coffee shops or bookstores and things like that. Eventually, DeLand started having a farmers market every week, a fall arts festival that now draws more than 50,000 people a year, and community events across the calendar pulling in as many as 200,000 visitors annually. I was drawn to this building when I was writing. I didn't even know what it was. I've always wanted to restore them, with a retail on the bottom and like a place to live up top. I just think that would be so cool. This is the James W. Wright building. It was built in 1920 by a black banker and citrus grower to serve DeLand's black community during segregation, because that black community, of course, needed a place for retail and a place to shop and a community center to be a part of. And it's being revitalized too. It's a piece of the town's full story finally getting its due. And then came the people. Since 2010, DeLand's population has grown by more than 70%. During the pandemic years, remote workers and transplants from up north discovered what generations of Floridians had already known. This was a place with real character, real community, and room to build a life. New apartments have risen downtown. New housing is planned. And that same downtown that once had people doubting that anyone lived there now has people trying to figure out how to live in it. A lot of those shops, if they have upper stories, are working to convert those into places where people could live. So DeLand didn't just get lucky. It got rebuilt in many ways, and by people who looked at the empty storefronts and a shuttered theater and decided, you know what, our story isn't over. DeLand was built once, lost its footing, and built itself again. That's not just local history. That's the whole reason towns like this are worth riding out to see. All right, Navi-Gators, how about that? DeLand, Florida. Kind of cool. I love this story. I love the story of Henry DeLand wanting to give back. I love that. In today's world, all we see is so much of people trying to build for themselves, try to make money off of everything. You're getting shown advertisements for everything and people promising you all these things about how they could make your life better. And what I loved about this story is Henry DeLand was like, okay, I have enough. It's not about me making my life more. It's about me making life better for others. And I just think that's awesome. So if you ever get a chance to visit DeLand, especially on a motorcycle, but it could be in a car, people use those today. And then walk around on your feet. People do that too. Both the city and Stetson are really awesome. And so if you get a chance, please ride through DeLand, stop by, check out the place. It's really cool. And as always, I am so grateful that you have spent this day with me. As you know, I think time is the most precious treasure we have. And so the fact that you've spent any of that with me means the world to me. So thank you so much. And remember, Navigators, when you're on the road, be happy, be kind, be generous to those around you. But most of all, have fun. All right, Navigators, I will see you next time.